And that was the conversation that we had with them when we kind of outlined. The basic discussion was the board needs to work for whatever support that they need to provide to council, but it also needs, they're volunteers. We need to work within their schedule. Meeting on a monthly basis when you don't have a lot going on sometimes is a little bit difficult. And if you can't hold their interest, well then interest wanes. So we kind of pared that back and we realized what the true function of the tree advisory board is, established by ordinance and everything along that lines. Basically, they kind of said, well, we could get by with meeting on that a couple times a year. We have staff that can look at the value of our trees and what needs to be done, make those type decisions. So from a board's perspective, it's more talking about the overall care of the trees within the community and not so much making a decision, this tree needs to come down or this one needs to stay. So when we got to Parks and Recreation, we had kind of talked about the events and whether that is a function that needs to remain within the Parks Board, or is that something separate that something along the lines of an event committee would handle. Great discussion throughout the whole entire evening. But the reason why we went ahead and proposed it at 4 times quarterly is because your exact point, sir, that they could easily, if they wanted to, if there was an event coming up that they were going to participate or they needed to meet more frequently, then they could always say, hey, look, it's not good to wait another 3 months, let's get together next month. In fact, the emails that have been flying just today talking about this and the bylaws have sat there and said, we definitely need to get together in September, even though we just met last week, because they're coming up with a prioritized list of what they want to work on over the next 12 to 18 months. So each board member was asked to come up with their list, and then we'll combine that, and then we're going to recommend going forward that there be almost a joint meeting with council so that they hear your vision and guidance for what they should be working on as well, just to make certain the communication's there and everybody's on the same page. So.
Okay. Jim?
I was just listening to everything, and I kind of feel, honestly, I feel like maybe we're micromanaging a subcommittee here. I was going to say, is this a simple thing? Just say they can meet no less than quarterly or semi-annually. Put the no less than, and if they want to meet more than that, they can. Just let it up to them, and then kind of be done with it. That's just my input.
Okay. John?
I was going to say similar to what Jim was saying. I mean, I feel like monthlies seems excessive. I didn't realize they met every month. And I mean, I just wonder if maybe that commitment is kind of what has maybe hurt participation in the board, is meeting that often. I mean, you think about it, we meet twice as much as that and run the entire city for 365 days. Is that really necessary? I mean, to me, a monthly thing seems quite often, but again, do the other committees meet monthly?
No. I mean, CNT meets every other month. Sorry. I was going to say, that's been one of the problems with Park Board and trying to find people. And I get people and we get them on, and they're tasked with too much. They're asked to do things that they didn't sign up for. They signed up to be part of an advisory board to kind of help look at the parks, and then they're being asked to go serve and do things and do these extra things that they're like, well, that wasn't what I signed up for. And especially in the tree board part, you know, there's no reason for the Park Board to have a 2.5-hour meeting, and they are having some meetings like that. And it's because we need to get the direction cleaned up on what the Park Board is. And in the past too, there's been this event committee that's been formed out of the Park Board, and then they have meetings somewhere else, and then they come back, and we're violating all these open meeting acts, and we have council members participating in that, which should not be. So Sean's come up with a good idea that we just have an events committee, and people that want to do events sign up and be part of that, and I think that's a great idea, and people who want to do parks can sign up and do parks. But I would agree with kind of what's been said, especially with what Tom said. You just go with the quarterly, and if they feel like they need to have another meeting, just call a special meeting. This is just the same as we do. I mean, we've had several special meetings over the last several months when we come up with something that needs some additional work or a workshop. and you allow them to have that flexibility. But I think if we can decrease the commitment level, I think we can improve the structure of the park board.
I mean, I take great value in the park board. I mean, I think they do something for the community and for the city that the other committees don't. I mean, quite frankly, the impact that they have on attracting residents, keeping residents is great. But I mean, we have to have folks on the board for it to function. So, I mean, I guess I'm kind of more of maybe every other month just to see if that works. If that's still excessive, I mean, you can always cancel a meeting too. But this way you're kind of being real. If you say quarterly and then you end up calling a special meeting every other time, then it's not really, I'm open to it. You guys have been more in depth with the park board than what I have, and Sean's been to the meetings as well, but yeah, I'm open.
I think I personally side with Sean and where he's at on the recommendation here. And the other thing, and you've kind of hit it good, and Sean is, his vision is parks is also a part of economic development within the community. That's what we need to try to get the park board aligned with, where we're doing things and making improvements in the parks that helps make Park City a desirable community to live in. And I think you're going to see that with the presentation that Sean has next on one of the parks. And this was something that Sean's already pitched to the park board to kind of get them fired up and engaged about an actual park board vision that everybody should be working on that can translate into some type of economic development and also making the neighborhood more desirable to be in.
Okay, thank you.
Ben?
First up, real quick, so in order to approve the ordinance, it has nothing to do with changing the meetings, correct? The ordinance has no bearing on that, so.
That's correct.
Okay, so all this discussion right now as far as how often they should meet or whatever, Jim brought up micromanaging, why don't we just let them talk about it on September meeting and figure out when they want to, what they want to do, rather than just coming back here and deciding and going through this. If the ordinance can pass without any sort of need for us to talk about how often they meet, then let's address the ordinance and get that passed. Then let them discuss and talk about what they see there in that. And in September, if they need to make a change, it's not going to change the ordinance, has no bearing on the ordinance, so we don't have to print anything, then we can make a change to that. I mean, that would seem to make more sense than going back and forth over dates and often frequency.
The ordinance only relates to the tree board. I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear. The ordinance does not affect the park board.
Doesn't it affect the members?
No.
No?
That's done by the bylaws.
So there are two.
There's nothing in our ordinances that establish the membership of the park board.
Okay.
There were two provisions in our ordinances that established 7 as the number of members of the tree board.
Okay.
So that had to be changed, but the membership of the park board and its meetings are things that are covered by their bylaws, but our ordinances do require us to approve their bylaws. So
Okay.
right now, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
I
They
guess,
can't change their bylaws until we approve
The
them.
big piece right now is we need to make the change to the bylaws because there are not enough people to have a meeting. So they can't have a meeting and approve any bylaws first to come back to the council for approval. So that's where we're having to step in to make a change, especially as it relates to number of members, so that they could discuss or talk about anything else. Tom?
sorry, second part to that, what I was going to add is just clarification. It's not the park board, it is the Park and Recreation Advisory Board. So I would suggest that we get some clarification as to what the recreation part should include, because it's not solely a park board. So I would encourage, I don't know if we can talk with them, get some definition there on that, but somehow, I mean, recreation does imply activity of some sort, or activities of some sort there. And so if that's something that does fall under the jurisdiction of Park and Recreation Advisory Board, then it would be good to provide good direction from them, or get good direction from them on what they view the recreation part to be on that board.
Which would be part of their bylaws.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that we can't talk about not excluding activities that are done by the Park and Recreation Board if that's something that they feel is part of their is part of it. If we're just selling it as a park board, well, then we're kind of being disingenuous to the recreation part of it.
Which is part of their bylaws, right? That we had let them come up with.
Yeah, and what, to this point, that's what they felt they're supposed to do. So if we're going to talk about excluding events or whatever, that's fine. I think it'd be good to get clarification and to include the fact that it is a recreation advisory board as well, not just park.
Okay, Tom?
Okay. Item 13 says, discuss and consider amending the bylaws of the Park and Recreation Advisory Board and the Tree Advisory Board. And if I flip it over, it says, somebody move to approve ordinance amending. So what are we doing tonight?
Well, I would say the first thing we need to do is take the first action, which would be the change of the ordinance, and then just on the second part would be ask somebody to amend the bylaws to a member of 5 on the park and tree board, or on the park board, because we're taking care of that in the tree board, correct, in the ordinance, right, Doug? The number of people on the tree board is being taken care of by the ordinance.
But it's also reflected in the bylaws.
So
But we couldn't do the bylaws until the ordinance
Right.
was changed because the ordinances trump the bylaws. So the ordinance is something that you can adopt and has nothing to do with the discussion that
Right.
we've been hearing about the Park Recreation Advisory as far as their membership or their meetings.
Right. So then the second part would just be changing the bylaws to a 5-member.
This gets back to where we were messing with the ordinance, and I was confused on what we were trying to do with that ordinance, and I didn't want to do something tonight
Ordinance is for the tree board.
from the bench and then come back next month and do it again. I did not want to do
Yeah.
that. So
You would not have to redo the ordinance.
I understand that now, but it's not clear to start with, so, okay.
Brandy?
I make a motion to approve ordinance 1069-2019, amending the sections 12-403 of the Municipal Code of City Park City, Kansas, pertaining to the establishment of the tree board and the term of office for members appointed to the board, and repealing the original of said sections 13-402 and 13-403.
John?
Second.
Okay. We got a motion and a second. Not seeing any further discussion. Dee, would you call the roll?
John Hare.
Aye.
George Glover.
Aye.
Ben Salcetta.
Aye.
Melvin Kerr.
Aye.
Tom Jones.
Aye.
George Capps.
Aye.
Brandy Bailey.
Aye.
Jim Schrader.
Aye.
All right, and that ordinance passes 8-0. Ben?
Make a motion to approve amending the bylaws of the Park and Recreation Advisory Board and the Tree Advisory Board, there concerning the membership, 7 members to 5.
Tom?
I'll second that.
Doug, does that motion also need to include the term? Like we changed the term, do we need to also change the term in the bylaws?
5 members, 2-year term.
No, so we changed the membership, but also in the ordinance, we changed the term from 3 years to 2 years. Does that need adjusted in the bylaws as well? Or is the term only in the ordinance? So that's why I was thinking that we need to also, if we're going to, we need to be consistent with what we're doing. If we're going to reduce the number, we need to reduce that term in the bylaws as well.
Sure. Can I go ahead and amend my motion there to include from going from 7 members to 5 members for 2-year terms?
Okay? And Tom?
Agree with that.
Okay. We got a motion and a second. Not seeing any further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion passes 8-0. That brings us to item 14, which is discuss and consider improvements to Jardine Park. Sean?
That's what started a lot of this conversation. First of all, I want to be very clear. This is not a new idea. This is not my idea. This is an idea that was brought up back in 2005, 2006 from the mayor at that time period. Jardine or Jardine Park, however you want to pronounce it, is a serene but difficult to access 3.2 acre park between West Parkview, Jacksonville, and Independence Street. Over the years, both residents and our police department have expressed concerns about the existing park access and the overall security of the park due to its isolation or its limited visibility from the public right-of-way. So staff has taken a look at this and is proposing a series of improvements to address some of those concerns, hopefully while enhancing the park and making it more accessible to the neighborhood and the general public. The proposed improvements include converting the North Park entrance right next to the Jardine's home into a pedestrian path, and eliminating the existing internal parking space of the park, constructing a small 5 or 6 car parking lot on the vacant lot south and adjacent to the park, constructing a 6-foot wide pedestrian path throughout the park, installing removable bollards on the north end of the park. Originally, I had proposed on the south end as well, but I don't think that that's necessary. The reason why that they would be removable is if any of the utility companies needed to get back in there to service the 2 light poles that we have back there, you could easily unlock the bollard at the base, remove the bollard, and they'd have access into the park. And number 6 is installing a 6-foot privacy fence along the back property line of the homes located on the west and the southwest side of the parks. And then finally, installing a new park sign that is consistent with the rest of the park signs in the community. We are still in the process of obtaining quotes on each of the individual listed items above, and before we went any further, we'd make certain that it was brought up to both the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board as well as Council. But right now, we're looking at it's approximately about $35,000 to complete all the proposed improvements. And I'd like to remind Council that both our 2019 and 2020 budgets have funds identified under capital outlay under Parks Department. So this could fall within that. Once the total costs are identified, staff would formally present this to Council for approval. But right now, we're just seeking guidance from Council to make certain that the direction or the proposed concept that we're going in the right direction. Ted, do we have slides, please? Do we have any? We don't have any slides? Any of the attachments?
They're in everybody's packet if you can scroll through on your device.
Does everyone have a copy of the?
Yes.
Okay, so I just, because we'll briefly discuss this, tidbit fact that I found, formerly known as Mobile Park, renamed August 10, 2004 to honor Charles and Donna Jardine for their 50 years of outstanding service and contributions to the community. So it's highlighted as far as the outline of the park. The next page is about a dozen pictures of the park that I'm certain you're all familiar with. The third page just talked about some of the issues and concerns that we had. The fifth page is the one that has some measurements associated with it, where we're looking at that just to figure out how much of a privacy fence. And the reason for the privacy fence, that would be the one area that I think if council had concerns about the overall cost of the project could be scaled back or eliminated. The reason why I looked at proposing that is when you get back into Jardine Park, it's a gorgeous little park area, no doubt about it. There's a compilation of different sorts and types of fences all on that. And somebody may ask, well, why wouldn't you do that on the eastern side of the park? Well, as you're aware, there's a drainage ditch creek that runs through the park, and so the very far eastern edge of the park is not really utilized much. And so there's that natural buffer or separation between the homes and the park there. Whereas on the south and the southwest side, there is not. So we thought just a regular pressure-treated 6-foot-high privacy fence, making certain that the fence is oriented correctly so that the rails are on the inside property for the individual homeowners, so that way there's no security concern with people back there scaling the fence. It would make it a little bit more difficult. There are 2 light poles in the park area right now, currently. There's no doubt that maybe a year down the road, if these improvements are made and we want to put a little bit more money into it, the playground equipment is a little bit old and dated. That, again, could be something that the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee could look at as a follow-on to making improvements to it. There's a couple other pictures. Proposed walking trail. Right now, we just figured out the cost to put one that's, I think, somewhere around 1,000 foot long, 6 foot wide, going through the park. The parking lot in the south adjacent lot, we'd like to just take that and make certain that that would be the formal entry into Jardine Park going forward. Put a nice new sign there, and that way people would now come to associate that property with Jardine Park rather than previous. It's the only way to put it. One of the concerns that had been done previously or talked about previously, and why I think things may have stalled earlier, was the house just to the north adjacent to that vacant property. Right now it is up for not sale, it's a leased, well, sale I should say. It's a leased own type. There was a company out of San Diego that just recently purchased it and has flipped it and made improvements to it, and they have it on the market. So when they were in that process, I went out and discussed the park issue with the individuals there and kind of explained the history of the vacant lot next to them. And I told them that if they were willing to dedicate that back portion, approximately about 30 foot of that corner, that would make a nice entrance into the park to where that way people could come, park their cars, get strollers out, and walk into the park that way. So it keeps, if there is concerns about what people may do or not do in their cars, now they're visible from the public right away. When they're back in the park, it's still a very isolated park. And there's always going to be concerns about that. But one of the, discussing it with the police chief is right now, there's only that one entrance in on the north side. So as long as you're looking that one way, you can kind of figure out if somebody's coming. Well, if we have two different entrances, one from the north and one from the south, you never know which way the police are going to come. So hopefully that would cut down on it. So finally, one of the last slides in there is just within the last couple months, we received the updated hike and bike, walking trails, pedestrian trail plan for the community going forward, and making improvements to Jardine Park does support that plan. It would be envisioned per that plan that Jardine Park would be accessed via Jardine, the collector, with a multi-use parking shoulder and a pedestrian path on the new Jacksonville Drive pedestrian path, and then via a one-sided pedestrian path along Mobile Drive and Denver Drive. So there's a copy out of the comprehensive plan for our hike and bike trails. So, answer any questions you may have.
George?
Well, the parking lot there, of course, that in a residential area, what kind of times are you looking at for opening the park and closing it?
Right now, the park's published hours, I believe, are from 6:30 in the morning to 10:30 in the evening, or 6 a.m. to 10:30 p.m., and I don't see why it would be different than that.
Well, I know that's closed in where you're talking about the parking lot. You know, I got a lot of thoughts about that. You know, my dad lived down there. Him and Charlie, back when this was Improvement District, they kind of ran the park because people used to come in and dump trash in the ditch, and it'd stop up the culvert, and it was always flooding. And Charlie and my dad had a lot of issues down there with violators. Used to play a lot of softball there. In fact, there used to be a backstop there. I don't know whatever happened to it. They took it out. But I got some. I like it. I like the walking path. I like the idea that people could get in there. I had always thought, I don't know if it's possible or not, but I'd like to see a walking path from 61st Street right along the drainage ditch into the park if that's possible. I know you can walk down there now, but I don't know if you could put a trail through there. The main thing now is keeping dogs from jumping the fence and attacking you. But I looked at your deal. I can see some things that I'd like to see. You know, one is I know we had a portable restroom in there, and we had a problem with vandalism with it, you know. Kids come in and turn it over. Is there any thought to cameras or stuff?
Oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, the police chief did talk about that. And it's like, okay, if we're going to start addressing the elephant in the room, let's talk about it one step at a time. Kind of make some improvements right now. I'm certain the police would love to have a security camera back there. So we had kind of talked about, well, and I've worked with Ted to figure out what kind of camera system would it need to be. Does it need to be something that would tie into our Genetec system to where we could monitor it 24 hours a day from the police department here? Or is it something that we could get by with a lesser expensive option such as game cameras? Something that would just, so it's one of those things that anytime you make any improvements to it, you hope that the community gravitates towards it and everybody starts treating it as though it's their own personal property. We just have to take a look-see and figure out, but we could also entertain that. Originally last week, I did make this presentation to members of what is our Parks and Recreation Board, realizing that they didn't have a quorum and they couldn't make a formal recommendation to council. I at least wanted to touch base with them and make certain that I got their buy-in as well, and thought that it's a worthwhile project. So, but that's something, if we're going in the right direction, if we want to look at cameras, we can add that into it as well.
Well, I don't know. I was disappointed. You know, as you look at that, all the houses surround that, and the back of the houses all look into the park. And women and men, they stand at the sink looking out their back window, washing dishes or doing whatever, and they were exposed to some stuff they didn't need to be exposed to. And that's why I asked Jack years ago to put the porta-john in there, which he did, but it became I guess, too much of a problem with vandalism. I would like to see something like that addressed, because our citizens shouldn't be subjected to that. They just shouldn't.
Sir?
George, you good? Okay. George?
Yeah, I like the idea, Sean. Any kind of improvement is better than no improvement when it comes to fixing up. This particular park, I didn't even know where it was. I stumbled on it when I first moved to Park City. So I think if we push that, if we had some like PR stuff on this particular park and say, hey, we've got a park now, we've got walking trails, we've done some things, come out and check it out, that would promote more folks, city folks coming out there and checking it out, maybe participating in soccer, whatever they want to do family-wise out there in the park, but maybe updating some things as well, go hand in hand in that. But also the 5 to 6 car parking lot on the south adjacent, this is going to be concrete as well.
We're looking at various different cost alternatives. We could go as simple as decomposed granite, or we could, I don't think
based
that
on
would
the
last.
35, based on the amount you had
Right
said,
now, I'm
was
looking
that-
at it as an asphalt driveway.
Okay.
Asphalt parking lot rather than concrete.
Okay, well, anything that would be updated with what you have now.
Yes, sir.
But I'm in favor of this. I think any kind of improvement is better than no improvement, and getting folks out using the walking paths, working on their health concerns they may have, promoting it. I think it'd be beneficial to the city. Thank you.
Ben?
I just want to say thank you, Sean, for a lot of the time all the time that you put into this. A lot of time is what I was trying to say into this presentation there. I think it's a great idea. It's a great starting point to really move forward from. And I say starting point, it might be 90% of the overall plan, but it's a great place looking forward, and allows for a lot of this, allows the park to be revitalized and utilized in a new way there. So I think it's a great idea to explore, look, see what we can do on that. I know, like I said, several of the members were excited about the options of there, and like I said, maybe we can find some new utilization from there. So I'd be supportive of moving forward and developing this plan.
Jim?
I appreciate the proposal and the discussion, so I really have nothing else to add other than just to say I support what you're doing. I think it's a good idea.
Tom?
I understand on the fence, trying to get everything to match the back across there, and I understand why you might look at a privacy fence, but I would consider looking at a 5 or 6 foot chain link fence across all those backyards too. Separate the yard as long as you got it consistent all the way through there. Security issues we just discussed would be less of an issue if you can see through a fence than if you can't. So we need to look at both sides. I could go either way, but I think that if you matched all the chain link up, then it would be one way to do it too, so.
I think part of that too was having a community meeting.
Yes, sir.
Where we were contacting the homeowners to see what they desire as well too.
And as long as council agrees that we're heading in the right direction, that's one of the things that I would like to plan for. I make the natural assumption that it's making improvements to the park. Everybody would love it. We need to solicit the invites or the inputs from the homeowners around there to figure out how they would want this to be handled as well.
I like the idea.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Brandy?
I like this idea too, as well. I'm excited that you're including the connectivity plan in with this to kind of bring it all together. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, not see any more comments, so we'll move on to governing body reports, and we'll start with Jim.
I don't have anything to add tonight.
Okay, Brandy?
I don't have anything tonight.
George?
Well, the only thing I got to say is outside of don't text and drive, basically with school starting, as I walked early in the morning, it surprised you how many mothers and fathers you see texting on their phone while they're driving through the school zone. And that's just uncalled for. And the other thing, I sat here and didn't say nothing, heard a lot of discussion about the tree board and stuff, and Sean touched on it when he said, you know, we're missing the point. The main objective is to take care of the trees. Twice in the last 30 years, this city has been shut down because we haven't taken care of our trees. In 1990, you couldn't get an emergency vehicle through our streets because the wind took the trees down. Just a few years ago, we had a major ice storm, and almost half of our citizens were without electricity for several days. And it kind of paralyzed things. And that was because we didn't take care of our trees. We used to do that, and for whatever reason, we stopped. We used to get rid of the bad trees. And I don't know if it was a matter of finances or what. I was not part of that decision making. But we used to have a councilman named Donovan Hale who lived in Ward 3, and I mean, he was on top of that like a frog on a fly. He saw to it that those trees got taken care of. And we need to get back to that. We need to take care of those old bad trees. If you look, we got a bunch of them. And all we need is a major windstorm or another major ice storm, and we're going to wish we had them. That's all I have tonight.
One thing I would say, just to piggyback off what George says, and this is really for everybody, everybody has issues that are hot to them and hot topics, but we're a large city. It's an elephant. It's a big thing, and we got to take one bite at a time. So if you will send an email, photo, address, and send it to Sean and I, things happen. But you got to be specific. You know, Tom's over here talking to me about some tree that's hanging out and it needs cut back. Send me an email, tell me where it's at, and we'll get it taken care of. But those things you say in passing or that it's all over, look for something specific, give us the specifics, and we'll knock it out.
But we used to, what I'm trying to say, Mayor, is we had a program, and that program worked. The program worked. You didn't have to do that, because every year they went there and took care of the bad things. It was just done. And somewhere in the late 90s, they took it out of the budget and quit doing it. And now we can do it piecemeal, like you say, but like I say, we used to have a program, and that program worked.
I would agree. But it'd be a good thing. Let's start somewhere and start rolling on some of that stuff. Tom?
I saw something kind of interesting yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Sean yet, but I know we're looking at Old Lawrence Road, which is probably a road that ought to be closed, but we're looking at what we can do to improve it. And from 47th or 45th Street to Broadway, where you come out and make a right-hand or a left-hand turn illegally, pretty much, off of Old Lawrence Road onto Broadway. Yesterday at 1:05, I saw one Burkamp truck turning onto 45th Street from Broadway, going back to get a load of dirt. I saw 5 Burkamp trucks with dirt heading to 135, 235 junction. 2 18-wheelers coming from, it looked like United Warehouse. A metal truck headed south to 45th Street to go over to the metal place, and a concrete truck on that road, on that half mile. And they're passing each other, and it's not wide enough for semis to pass down through. It's very interesting. So people do not realize the traffic that we got on some of our roads around here. And that was just a one snapshot. And I just sat there, I just like in awe, all the vehicles were down there. They were all 18-wheelers. I didn't see one car except for the concrete truck. They were all semis. And that's a lot of activity on that little short road. And it was built, what, in the 20s out of brick? So, and it's not wide enough. So anyway.
Thanks, Tom. Melvin?
I have nothing.
Ben?
Sure, I want to wish all of our students going back to school this week or the next week best of luck this year, starting out in Valley or in USD 259. Also, invite you all to join me Saturday for our Convos event, 9:30 there. I'd love to have you out there. And then one thing I'd like to see us maybe talk about here or look at, and next year Park City celebrates its 40th birthday, and Brandy and I had some conversation with some of the members on the 4th of July committee, and like to see if maybe something we could consider is putting together a committee that would work towards 2020 and having a good celebration of some sort there. So maybe next meeting or a month or so out, maybe look at that option.
Okay. George?
I don't have anything.
John?
I have nothing. I'd make a motion, we adjourn.
And Ben?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Not seeing any further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries 8-0. Thank you.